Hello folks, this is Glenn Guy, your travel photography guru. For those of you who have been following these broadcasts over recent times, you'll know that I'm running a photography tour to China in January 2012. Today's presentation deals with one of the locations, Ice World. So Ice World is situated in the city of Harbin, which is in far northeast China, roughly squeezed between Siberia and North Korea. So it's geographically quite remote, although the population of the city is almost 10 million people. Ice World itself is on a large allotment of land outside of the city limits. As you can see, it's just a fantastical environment, illuminated by artificial light, and it really comes to life at night time. It's incredible. Very, very large. I reckon I would have spent about 3 hours wandering around taking pictures. And this is a more distant view, but this is only a component of Ice World. I mean, it's that big. And there are large buildings and smaller buildings to photograph, but you can see they are literally life-size replicas, in some cases of famous buildings from history. In other cases they're just created literally from fantasy. Just outstandingly beautiful. I was laughing out loud on a couple of occasions because it was just so much fun. Quite a lot of people were there, but because it's so large, I was never aware of more than maybe half a dozen people, I suppose, at any one time around me. And I just kept moving. If one place was crowded, well, I'd move on. But sometimes, of course, it's nice to have people in the image to help tell the story, and also for that sense of scale, which we've talked about previously. And they're anonymous. You don't have to have any worry about including people in a picture like this. When they're backlit, they're silhouettes, so they're unrecognisable. They're more iconic. The shot, I suppose, is more about the tourist, or the guy photographing his girl, rather than about the individual people involved. We can't see who they are. Now you may notice the haze in the air, and well, the atmospherics, really, all the moisture, I suppose. And it actually looked beautiful to the eye to behold that, and it would actually literally change the colour of the sky. That's how it appeared. But I would probably, in retrospect, I'd probably say it's better to photograph the buildings when you don't have that glow around them, because it does tend to be a little bit hazy. I would often photograph a scene like this, maybe 5 or 6 frames, same exposure, but just as the lights changed, because they're flashing on and off probably every few seconds, and you end up with a very different colour palette to work with. The most vibrant looking scenes were the ones where the light tended to spread into the atmosphere surrounding the building, which coloured the sky. And I think just in retrospect, it may have been better to have had a darker sky most of the time, and to have contained the colour in the structure itself. So that's just something to be aware of. I used my Canon 5D Mark II, and I had a 24-105 lens. That's all I required. The advantage of the zoom lens is you're not having to interchange lenses, which in the old days didn't bother me at all, but now with the potential problems with dust and foreign particles getting on the sensor, I use a zoom quite frequently these days, but really only for that reason. Well, that's the dominant reason. It's only an f4, so it's not an incredibly fast lens, but it's consistently f4, which is very important. So regardless of whether I'm at the 24 or 105mm end, the maximum aperture remains f4. On most lenses, as you zoom in, as you use the more powerful end of the lens, in this case up towards 105, the ability to gather light is reduced, and your maximum aperture might be 5.6 or even less, a number like 6.3, you're losing the ability to gather light as you zoom in. With this lens, that's not the case, and I think it's a critical point. I was working handheld. I think there were a handful of shots I made with the tripod, but basically I worked handheld at ISOs between 400 and 1600. Most of the shots were made in the 400 to 800 range, handheld, at moderate apertures, so 5.6, 6.3, something like that. And those apertures don't give a very large depth of field normally, but because I was standing a reasonable distance away from the building, I was able to achieve sharpness from the front to the back of the building with that modest aperture, again, of about 6.3. It would be wise to bring a tripod, particularly for those folks who aren't used to working handheld at slow shutter speeds. Under those conditions, I was probably down to a 20th of a second or slower. In some cases, several of the exposures you'll see in this presentation were made at an 1/8 of a second handheld, and not a lot of people can hold the camera still at that shutter speed. So, tripod would make sense. That would allow you to shoot at the default ISO in your camera, 1 or 200. And of course it would allow you to close your aperture down to sort of 11, which theoretically will give you a very, very sharp result. It's kind of a sweet spot of many lenses. Now I hope that makes sense to everyone. It's really a class in itself, depth of field, but I'd just make a few points, and hopefully you'll either understand it or you've been able to just glean a little bit of interest from that. Now in this case I didn't mind the coloured light illuminating the sky. I thought it was beautiful, and it's a lovely contrast with the yellows and greens in the structure itself. Again, you notice that the people are all black because they're backlit, they're silhouette. From my way of thinking, it's well worth visiting. I had a ball, it was a lot of fun. It was an opportunity to do night photography, and most of us don't do as much night photography as we would like. So, dress for the cold, very important. Dress in layers, for instance, several layers of fleece. A balaclava was required. If I didn't have the balaclava on, my face felt the pinch of the cold very, very quickly. Once I put the balaclava on, I was toasty warm for the whole evening. Of course, I had numerous layers and the overboots, which I've mentioned previously. And they kept my feet really warm. The notion of a frame within a frame in that last shot. And this is amazing, a lighthouse, and as you can see by the light poles, telephone poles in the background, that it's pretty much a life-size structure. It's just extraordinary. That was really on the edge of the complex, so there's not much going on around it. So after I'd photographed most of the interesting structures in the centre of the complex, I moseyed around the outside just exploring, and it was great to have seen this. I think few people actually got this far off the track, if you like. Not a theme park as such, but there was this snow slide, I suppose, this tobogganing run, and that was pretty popular. But there wasn't a whole lot of noise that carried, so most of the time you're wandering around and you're really quite isolated. People are around you, but because of all the clothing you're wearing, you're isolated as well as insulated in a way. You're very much in your own world, which actually makes it a lot easier to make the pictures. Just, an incredible place. So my plan would be on the tour to actually get there a little earlier so that we're there for the last of the light in the afternoon, maybe a sunset if we're lucky, the dusk light, the twilight into the evening. And that would give us a whole range of photographic possibilities. It's amazing the transforming nature of light on a surface, particularly a translucent surface like ice. And the colours are a little gaudy. In some cases I've pushed the colour a bit in processing. In most cases I've been quite accurate to the colours that were there, because the colours are surreal to begin with. In fact, with these lanterns, the colours were so vivid, I actually had to pull the saturation down considerably, because particularly on the internet, it's just the colour space of the internet, sRGB, just couldn't contain the vibrant colours in these lanterns, and they would have just been blobs of colour. So to keep any shape or texture in them, I've desaturated them considerably for this presentation. So all of this work's done handheld. So this is one where I've had to push the ISO up. But in many cases I was around the 500 ISO. And the bell, very symbolic in Chinese culture. One way to handle that overly vibrant colour, of course, is to take the colour out of the image, in part by desaturating it, or entirely making it black and white. And in this case there's enough tonal difference between the lanterns that I think it's successful. Some are brighter than others. Some steps leading up to one of the ice structures, and you're able to walk up the steps and move around and examine the structure in detail. So the tour is running in January 2012, over 10 days. There'll be a maximum of 10 people on the tour, and Iceworld will be one of those wonderful locations we visit. So I'm planning half a day at Snow World, half a day / evening, so probably late afternoon into the evening at Iceworld. So inclusions for the tour would be accommodation, meals, all internal flights and any necessary local transport. Also included will be numerous theory sessions and prac sessions relating to each location we visit, so you've got the tips you need to ensure that you're going to get good photographs. There'll be image processing provided, image processing demonstrations. Technically not a good image, but why not have a bit of fun, talk about the conditions. And just to express that point, after getting back from Iceworld, the first thing I did after I unloaded my gear in the hotel was go for a walk to find an ice cream, which probably sounds a bit strange, but you know, hopefully that makes the point that if you dress appropriately and look after yourself and have fun, not just sort of sitting in one spot, but actually moving around with your camera, you'll be fine with the weather. The exclusions, of course, airfares to and from China, because we'll all be coming from different parts of the world, and any drinks and snacks of your own liking that you may decide to purchase on the tour. You may decide to stay in China a little longer than the rest of the group, and naturally that would be at your own expense. From a photography point of view, photographing it at night time really adds an interesting extra element to the trip. I think it's wonderful, and I can certainly recommend it. So you can find me on my blog at travelphotographyguru.com, on Facebook and Twitter. And there we are outside the entrance to Snow World. Hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and the next one will deal with photography opportunities outside the normal tourist experience in Harbin.